You know the moveset. You have watched the deflect window so many times you could close your eyes and feel when it opens. And you still died. That is Death 20-something against Genichiro. But here's the thing about that death. It did not feel the same as Death 3. Death 3 was noise. You were overwhelmed. The fight had no shape yet. Death 20-something felt like the gap closing. Not because the boss changed, because you did. Every time you died, the game handed you something specific. A tell you now recognize. A rhythm you can now anticipate. The death count was the tuition. Now think about the last time you put a controller down and did not pick it back up. Not from fatigue. Something inside you just stopped. You were dying just as often. The failure screen looked the same. But the deaths were not teaching you anything. Some of them were not even your fault. These two experiences are not the same difficulty. They are not even the same kind of game. And the difference does not live in how hard they are. It lives in what they believe about you. I call this the Competence Contract. And once you see it, you understand why two games with the exact same death count can produce completely opposite outcomes inside the same brain. The count is not the point. It never was. Deci and Ryan spent decades building self-determination theory. The core finding is simple. Humans have three innate psychological needs: autonomy, relatedness, and competence. The felt sense of becoming more capable over time. When those needs are satisfied, intrinsic motivation fires and deepens. When they are threatened, motivation collapses, not gradually, sharply. Their research, published in The American Psychologist in 2000 and replicated across hundreds of studies since, showed that even small, consistent signals of growing competence are enough to keep engagement alive in even the most demanding tasks. Negative feedback diminishes it, but feedback that feels random does something worse. It severs the connection between effort and outcome entirely. When effort stops predicting outcome, the brain stops generating effort. That is not a metaphor. That is a measurable motivational deficit with a name and a mechanism. Sekiro honors this down to its bones. Lady Butterfly is the clearest example. You are going to die to her many times. But what Miyazaki built into that fight is not punishment. It is a curriculum. Every phase has one answer. Her phantom clones respond to pressure. Her silk threads have a specific counter. The perilous attacks announce themselves. Nothing she does is arbitrary. The posture bar is the most visible proof of this philosophy. It moves in your direction when you are correct. You can be losing the health fight entirely, and the posture bar is telling you that you are winning the deeper one. In a 2024 Game Informer interview, Miyazaki described the combat philosophy that defines Sekiro as something much more fluid and active, the clearest form that philosophy could take. That fluidity is not aesthetic. It is a commitment. Every mechanic says the same thing. The game is on your side. Your deaths narrow the gap. King Ice is where Cuphead breaks the contract. And the breaking is specific. You walk into that fight having learned how Cuphead works. It is a pattern game. Aggressive, gorgeous, learnable. That is the implicit promise every boss has made to you. Then King Dice introduces the dice roll. The mini-bosses you face are determined by where you land. Some combinations are far harder than others. You can die not because you failed to read a pattern, but because the number came up wrong. That moment, not the difficulty, is where something changes. Your brain was running on the assumption that failure was information. It just discovered that some failure is noise. It looks identical to the informative failure. It reads the same on screen. But inside, something goes quiet. A small part of the engine that was pulling you back to the retry button just stops. The counterargument deserves a real hearing. The Moldenhauer brothers made a deliberate choice. Cuphead is an homage to classic arcade games. games that ate quarters, games designed to be hard in exactly this way. That tradition is legitimate, and Cuphead is one of the most visually extraordinary games ever made, boss by boss, frame by frame. The Moldenhauers were not being careless. They were faithful to something they loved. But here is what changes when arcade logic stretches across hours instead of 3 minutes. The psychology of failure scales differently. In an arcade cabinet, the session is designed to end quickly. In Cuphead, you are sitting with a fight for 30 minutes. 40. The brain's response to uncontrolled failure at minute 3 and at minute 35 are not the same response. The format changed. The psychology of the format needed to change with it. It did not. Soviet neurophysiologist Nikolai Bernstein describes skill learning as repetition without repetition. Practice is never pure repetition because every attempt approaches the same problem from a slightly different angle. What the expert builds is not a locked motion, but an adaptive framework. Sekiro is building that in you. Every Lady Butterfly death is a different repetition. The game gives you enough consistent signal that your framework genuinely develops. Most Cuphead bosses do this equally well. The RNG elements corrupt it. Randomness injected into a system that has presented itself as deterministic poisons the learning signal. Your framework is trying to adapt. The problem keeps moving. Bernstein's blacksmiths would have stopped learning if the anvil moved between strikes. Seligman and Maier identified learned helplessness in 1967. Dogs exposed to inescapable shocks stopped trying to escape even when escape became possible. 3 deficits follow: motivational, cognitive, emotional. The motivational one looks like quitting. The cognitive one is subtler. The brain stops recognizing that control has returned. Full learned helplessness is not what Cuphead produces. The RNG sections are not pervasive enough. What they produce is a brief, local activation of the same signature. 30 seconds where your brain registers, effort is not predicting outcome here. That is enough. Once the brain logs that signal, the retry button costs more than it did before. Sekiro never generates that cost. Every failure there traces back to a specific decision. The game is not indifferent to your effort. It is watching every move you make. I thought I was just bad at Cuphead. Genuinely. I watched people clear king dice on their 5th attempt and assumed the gap was skill. I kept going back. Kept counting how many times I hit the pattern correctly before a bad roll undid it. I could not explain why the retries felt heavier than 30 minutes earlier. I was not angry. I had just quietly stopped believing that trying harder would change what happened next. Chess frustrates you because every loss is traceable. The board shows you where you went wrong. A slot machine creates a different state. The outcome is disconnected from the decision. Cuphead, at its worst moments, is a game that looks like chess and plays like a slot machine. That dissonance is the injury. And if this kind of analysis is what you want every week, subscribe, because that is exactly what this channel exists to do. Difficulty is not death count. It is not a number on a setting screen. It is a relationship between the game and the player, and that relationship has terms. The competence contract is the term that matters most. Every failure closes the gap between who you are and who you need to be. Sekiro is entirely built around keeping that contract. That is why people who quit in rage still come back. The game never broke faith with them. It only asked more than they had that particular day. Cuphead, at its best, honors the contract just as honestly. The problem is never the art, never the ambition, never the design tradition. It is the moments where the game stops being on your side. Here is what to sit with. When you go back to a hard game, what are you actually doing? Are you trying to beat the obstacle? Or are you trusting that the obstacle is fair? Those two things feel identical from the outside, but one of them is exhausting in a way the other never is. Drop in the comments, which game broke you first, and did you come back? The game that trusts you is the one you keep playing. The one that doesn't is the one you remember quitting, and still can't fully explain why.